Oh, hi. I don't know if anyone's watching, but hello, I'm Clara. Um, if the people who are watching are usually in the book club, then you know me. Um, Today we're going to talk about a couple of stories from this little collection that I made, Tales of Survival in Modern and Contemporary North America. Um, so I encourage you to write any ideas that you have about the stories that we're going to talk about today. They are Sweetness by Toni Morrison, and they are so this, if you have the book, it's on page 39, and then it's Girl by Jamaica Kincaid, which is on page 122. It's a very short story. The one, like, Girl, it's just like 2 pages, and Sweetness is like, I don't know, 6-7 pages. So because there's a little bit of delay or something, and it might be a bit awkward if I just shut up while you type in your ideas or comments. I'm going to start with a little bit of an introduction about these 2 writers so that you know kind of who we're dealing with. Before I do that, I had some questions that maybe will help you know where to go or what to talk about. Since we're talking about 2 stories, I would like for you to talk about how they are related, because they have a clear connection. They were written at different times, different places geographically, but they are very much connected. So if you can tell me more or less like what they are about. And then if you can also tell me what you think they are about, like the things that they have in common maybe, and the things that set them apart. And then we'll go one by one. So we'll start with Sweetness by Toni Morrison, and then we'll talk about the other one. I'm just gonna remove the noises here. Okay, so Toni Morrison. I don't know if you've heard of her before. She was born in the 20th century, early 20th, I think 1930s. And she died last year, I think, if I remember correctly. She was a Nobel Prize winner, Nobel Prize in Literature, and she's written a ton of novels usually about race and gender, about being Black in America. And she's written through different times, so not all of her novels are set in the same time. And then something that's also very something that I really encourage you to read if you're interested in Toni Morrison is one novel she has called Beloved. Then she has another one called A Mercy, and then one of my favorites is The Bluest Eye, which I would say can be connected to this story, because The Bluest Eye is about a Black girl who wishes she had blue eyes. So she goes through a lot of things in her life. It's a story where there's abuse, there's abandonment, there's dehumanization. And so that's something that is kind of related to this, in the sense that the girl in Sweetness, Lula Ann, she's also kind of isolated. Then one thing that I really like about Toni Morrison is that she always talked about the struggles of African American women. And I think oftentimes if you study American literature, we usually hear the stories of white men. So she's a great writer if you want to learn more about these kind of people. And I think it's great for this month of March, which is women's, it's the month of there was the Women's March. And so these 2 stories have to do with womanhood, girlhood, growing up as a woman, and in this case there's the intersection of women and race. And then with Jamaica Kincaid, she was born a little bit later. I think she was born in 1949, 1940s. And this story, so Sweetness, was published in 2015. It's actually part of a novel called God Help the Child. But this story was published in the New Yorker as a kind of standalone piece. So I think I would take it as its own story. And then if you want to know more about the story, then you can go ahead and read God Help the Child. And so it's a 2015 story, whereas Girl by Jamaica Kincaid was written in 1978. So I think it's also interesting to take into account the, while I'm explaining all of this, feel free to comment or like share any idea so that it's not just me talking forever. But something that I think is nice to take into account is the context. So Toni Morrison is American, and she was born in the US. Jamaica Kincaid is from Antigua and Barbuda, which is an island, like a country, but an island in the Caribbean islands, so in the West Indies, as they were known at the time meaning in the past. But their experiences are pretty similar in that they have to deal with blackness and being black in the West, and in countries that have been colonized and where slavery was commonplace in the past. So in more specifically, and something that I'm more familiar with, in the case of Toni Morrison, this is a story where you can read about, like, there are references to segregation, which is something that, so the story is set in the kind of present day, so more we see references to the 90s, so we're led to assume that this story, Sweetness, is set in like 2010 or 2015, like around that time. So it's a much different time than, you know, the past, obviously. So throughout the 20th century, there was segregation up until the 60s, and that's when it was outlawed. But before that, it was law. Like, it was accepted by the government, and it was actually obligated. People should be segregated. So white people would go to specific bars, and then black people would go to other bars. They would drink from different fountains. They would take they would take the same bus, but black people would have to sit at the back. And if if there were too many white people, then they would have to stand up and give, black people would have to give white people their seats. And so that happened after, so a little bit of historical context. In the 19th century, in the US, there was a civil war between the North and the South, and it eventually became mostly a war. Well, it was a war about slavery. Once it was over, there was a little period called Reconstruction, where they tried to rebuild the country and help African Americans escaped and freed slaves or ex-slaves. And white people were not very happy about that. They didn't want black people to have rights, and so they started fighting against it. This is the time where the KKK was founded. And so the Reconstruction period kind of failed. And so in 1877, it ended. And that's when segregation begins. It's also known as the Jim Crow laws. And so it's a series of measures and laws that are meant to separate black people from white people. So that's kind of the background of Sweetness. And that's where the mother of this story, where she's drawing from those experiences of being separated and how she's seen as a black woman. So I don't know if any of you have anything to say about this story. I wanted for you to tell me what you think about these two stories, what connects them, what sets them apart, you know, what's special about Sweetness, what's special about, I'll say it, Girl, and then if you like them, if you didn't like them, how you felt while you read them, what kind of tone you think they have, like each individually, what is the tone that you feel from these two stories? So in Sweetness, we have a first-person narrative or narrator. In Girl, it's kind of, well, there's been different interpretations, but to me, it feels like it's a second-person narrator. So it's like, you do this, you do that, you shouldn't do this, blah, blah, blah. So kind of how you feel that sets them apart. Oh, so someone has read Beloved, Sula, and Song of Solomon. And what did you think about them? Did you like them? How do they compare with this specific story? Do you feel like there are common themes, for example? I haven't read all of these books, by the way. The one that I remember the most is The Bluest Eye. These ones, not so much, because it's been a while since I was at uni. I I think Beloved I read, and the others I haven't, so I'll have to get to that. I'm kind of waiting a little because, as I said before, I don't want this to be kind of like a lecture where I just tell you everything that I've seen and that I find interesting, because the idea is that you tell me what you found interesting. So I'm also going to see if I can share, because I think I can, some comments. So, because I want to try to share the screen later on when we talk about Girl, because it's so short, we can go over the different parts of the text together. But let me see what you've said. I would say that something that relates both texts is that we find women conditioned by the rules of society. Yes, that's so interesting. That's kind of what both stories have in common, right? It's, well, and even more than that, it's not just women, but like mothers. So it's about motherhood, and you can see in both cases it's mothers and how they try to control their children, but in a way that I feel is very much connected to the title of this book club, which is like Tales of Survival in Modern America. Well, modern and contemporary. So by modern, we feel like it's 20th century. Contemporary would be like today. So it's mothers trying to help their children survive, right? Specifically women. So it's like women helping other women within the context of race. So Black women helping their Black daughters. But do you find, and this is before I move on to the next question, do you find that they actually help the children? Is it useful at all? Like, what do you think about that relationship between mother and daughter, and how good are the intentions of both of these women, Sweetness and the mother in Girl? What are they trying to accomplish? Do you think it's useful at all? Okay, let me move on to the next comment. The subject of segregation is not so much interesting for me, but I love so much how Toni wrote. Yeah, she's a great writer. I think she's so good. And something that I read once, which is not necessarily related to this, but is that usually we associate Ernest Hemingway with like succinct writing, and with writing like short sentences, not using a lot of adverbs, and just going straight, being very straightforward. But I read once that Toni Morrison actually uses even less adverbs, and she writes in a very direct and simple, not simple because it's like easy, but there's not a lot of like, I don't know how to put it, the way you would think of other writers like Virginia Woolf and these writers that write in a much more embellished way. This is super beautiful, but very straightforward, and I guess segregation, yeah, maybe you're not super interested in that, but I think it's interesting to see the effect it had on African Americans at the time and how it affected their own lives. Even within African American communities, this is something that we can see in this story, and I'll move on to the next comment in a second. But it's the idea that in African American communities, so I'm specifically, focusing on America, there was a lot of racism, like inner racism within those communities. So Black people towards other Black people. So the lighter you were, the lighter skinned you were, the more respected you were in those communities. So maybe think about that as well within the story of Sweetness, how that difference in skin affects their relationship, how the girl, like Bride or Lula Ann, feels about her own skin color, and how the mother feels. And there's something that I wanted to introduce now, so you can think about it as well, which is how is the daughter in Sweetness seen by the parents? There are different words that I'll show you in a second that are used to refer to her, but how is their relationship, but also how do they see her? Is she family? Is she like seen as a daughter? So think about that as well, because that's so interesting to see. And one, I'm completely ignoring these comments. I will get to this one in a second. One novel that I encourage you to read if you're interested in this idea of light skin versus dark skin is Passing by Mila Larson. Super interesting. Okay, let me address these comments. So I think on the one hand, the intentions may be good, but the result is tremendous, like a misinterpretation of the roles. In Sweetness, she wants to protect her, but she becomes bully number one. Yes, and I really liked that you said bully the way Girl also mentions the word bully. So if you look at the story of Girl, towards kind of the end of the story, they talk about bullying, like, this is how you bully a man, this is how a man bullies you, and it's like, yeah, but what about you bullying me? What about your mother, your family member bullying you, right? And I think in both cases it's the same, is that they have protective intentions, and in Sweetness she actually says it, like, I want to protect her. And here I am including another question for you to think about, which is that of blame and guilt, because the first, words that you see in the story of Sweetness are, it's not my fault, so you can't blame me. So it's the idea of, what is the tone of this story? Is she being honest? Is she being defensive? If so, why do you think she is? Also, who do you think she's talking to? I don't know, but like, maybe we can have ideas. But yes, it's the idea that you want to protect your child because of what's happened to you in your life. And so you're trying to hide your child as much as possible instead of giving your child the tools to survive and to make the world better. Because yes, I'm trying to give you the tools to survive in this world, but it's like, imagine you have a child who is, okay, this is going to sound terrible, but if you have a teenager who is ugly, as in non-normative, and doesn't fit the standards of society, and you say, you know what, you should get surgery to change your face so that you can live in this world. It's like, maybe we should try to make this world a safer place for everybody to live in, regardless of how they look like, instead of trying to hide them from the world. Because then you're giving in to the bullies, right? You're letting them control you. And then, yeah, super interesting, the last comment. I guess in both, the mothers are also victims of these same rules, so they end up passing them on to their children. And I think, yeah, 100%, I think that's something everybody or most people can relate to, the idea that our parents project onto us their own fears and their own experiences. So everything that's happened to them, they want us not to feel that, so they try to protect us. But many times, it kind of backfires so that it hurts us more than it helps us. Because sometimes I feel like there's not a lot of inner comments, like not inner comments, like the parents are not doing a lot of self-reflective work and saying, hey, what if I resist everything that happened to me? What if I fight against that, and then I try to make my child stronger so that she can endure whatever is going to come at her, but become really strong and fight those like racist, sexist people that she's going to encounter in life. So I think that's something that's really sad in this story, is this, both of these stories is well-intentioned mothers who are scared for their children and try to help them. But I think, something else that I want you to think about as well, and to kind of like try to comment on, is the idea of resistance and defense in both stories. I mean, it's so interesting. These stories have so much in common, even though the format is really different. So Sweetness is like a more straightforward short story, whereas you could consider Girl kind of like prose poem in a way, so that it's just one sentence, or if you count like interrogations, is a few more sentences, but it feels like it's just in under one breath. So it's just like, do this and do this and do this and remember this and remember that. So in that way, I also wanted to ask you what you think. What is the purpose of, in Girl, the format? How does it make you feel? If you read it out loud, because that's an exercise that I recommend you and I encourage you to do, is read it out loud. How would you feel? Just constant, like, it's kind of actually reminds me, I don't know if you've seen the Matrix scene where he's just dodging bullets, or just people are trying to fight him. It's just like trying to avoid all these different shots at her, or in this case at him. Okay, although I have to say in Girl, I didn't think it was actually the mother talking to the girl all the time. I thought it was like a compilation of society's comments to the girl. Yes, I mean, definitely. It's the easiest way to... also, by the way, before I continue explaining, there are 2 moments in this story where the girl answers. So it's not just one voice. There are 2 voices in this story, and I don't know if you found them or you saw that. If you do, let me know in the comments. So it's for sure. I mean, I think the most straightforward characters that we can see in this story is like, it's a mother and a girl, right? But at the same time, it's society telling women how to be, right? Younger children specifically. There are also in this story particularly elements that point to it aiming at lower class people, and people from Antigua, so not from anywhere in the world, but there are a few words that set the context, like geographical context. So we're led to think that it's not just directed to anybody anywhere, but more specifically people who probably share the same background as Jamaica Kincaid. So probably Black women in this particular place. So there are words like Bena, which is a kind of like Caribbean folk song. There's okra and dasheen, which are like plants, vegetables that are also usually found in the Caribbean. So these kind of like set the tone. Okay. In Girl, the format made me feel a bit overwhelmed, which I think was the purpose. Yes, that's exactly how I feel as well. I think another word to talk about it would be kind of like suffocating. So it's like the mother is smothering the child, like you can't catch your breath because it's like, do this and this and this and this, just like non-stopping. So it to the point where it's like, can I live for a second, because this is too much for me. So it kind of emphasizes the constant pressure that is put on little girls, specifically in Black girls, to live a specific way, right? And to be presentable and to not be too much, not be too little, to be exactly this specific thing. And this, of course, can be applied to white women, women of any other ethnicity or any racialized identity, of course. But I think it's important also to put it in context and understand the struggles of women who are not only white, who are not only, you know, women, but also Black, because that intersection of gender and race is very powerful. And it's like, as white women, we suffer from sexism every day, but we have a lot of privilege. Whereas in this case, it's like, it's not just that you're a woman and you have to abide by a set of rules, but you're also a Black woman, so you have to be even more careful, which is what the mother in Sweetness is so careful about and so scared of, right? So then I also, so yeah, you mentioned that in this story, Girl, the responses from the child are in italics, which in the book I forgot to, because I like kind of edited, I forgot to leave that in italics, so it's actually not in italics. So if you have the little like little compilation here, it's not that obvious, but at the same time you can kind of see, because they all start with the same word. and it's kind of a response to whoever is talking to them. So in my opinion, mother, but you can also see that as a metaphor for society, totally. So what can you tell me about that? Like, what did you find interesting about that? And there's a word that's also repeated a few times that's not a very nice word to talk about the child as well. And I don't know if you noticed that, or if you, what did you make of that? What did you think about it? And another question that I wanted to ask you is, the title is Girl. Do you think in this story the girl is, I guess it depends on who you think the narrator is, or the person who's talking is, but do you think the girl is the protagonist or the antagonist of this story? So that's also something that I find very interesting to think about. So I'll give you a minute while I look for something I wanted to say as well about the topic of blame and guilt as well, I think, because they can be both related as well in both stories. The first one starting with "it's not my fault," but the second one, there's also the idea of blaming the child for something, or which is this famous word that I told you that appears a few times. And then if you remember to think of different ways the daughter in Sweetness is referred to as well, I think that's it's very significant, I think. In fact, I think in both stories, how the girls are referred to. So yes, if we look at girl before we move on to these other ideas, I hadn't realized that both times the other voice starts with "but." Yeah, so it's trying to me, it feels like defensive, right? So it's like, you know, the mother or whoever is speaking, is it true that you sing Benna in Sunday school and then don't sing Benna in Sunday school? You mustn't speak, blah, blah, blah. And the girl answers, but I don't sing Benna on Sundays at all and never in Sunday school. So that's already, it's a very interesting defense, because it's showing that all these other things that the mother is telling the girl to do or not do, she might not do at all. She might be a very responsible child, or, I mean, some of these things have nothing to do with responsibility, but, you know, it's all things that the mother is just like hammering on so that the child can become this perfect person that society deems acceptable. And in the last, so there's 2 times that the girl answers, but I don't sing Ben on Sundays at all and never in Sunday school. And the second time she says, at the very end, when she says, you know, always squeeze bread to make sure it's fresh. But what if the baker won't let me feel the bread? So the girl is questioning the mother, which is another form of resistance, right? Instead of keeping quiet, she's like, yeah, but what if this happens? It's also the idea of seeking knowledge and curiosity. And then, I don't know if you noticed, but the very last sentence has to do with these words that are repeated a few times over the story, to talk about a woman. And she says, you mean to say that after all, you're really going to be the kind of woman who the baker won't let near the bread? So the mother is not really answering the question. She's just, you know, bringing it again back to the idea of blaming the child and kind of scaring the child, right? Like, don't do this, don't do that. Are you really going to tell me that you're not going to become that kind of woman that I'm trying to make you become? You know, instead of contemplating the possibility of something else happening, right, in the story. So I'm going to try to see if I can open the story of Girl, and I can share the screen. I don't know if it's going to work, but let me try 1 second, because then we can look at it together. Okay, can I do that? Share screen. I'm just going to try your entire screen, Chrome tab. Okay, share. Okay, in theory, you should be seeing, here you are, you can see this, right? Let me know if you can see it well or not. But I just wanted you to look at this word. Okay, let me see. On Sunday. Okay, this one. Okay, can you see that? So on Sundays, try to walk like a lady and not like the slut you are so bent on becoming. This word is repeated 3 times in the story, and in kind of a similar way. And it's actually, it feels to me like it doesn't really give a chance to the girl. Like, you are so obsessed on becoming a slut, you cannot do. So it's like she's not even being kind to the girl and saying, hey, maybe try to be like this, blah, blah, blah. But it's also like slut shaming the child. Also, like, who's to say that she's actually becoming this way? What does she understand as a slut? What, for the mother, what is a slut? Or for society, what is a slut? Because she might do things that have nothing to do with being a sex worker or whatever she thinks a slut is, but are just normal parts of growing up, right? And they're, right? This is how you behave in the presence of men who don't know you very well, and this way they won't recognize immediately the slut I have warned you against becoming. So again, this is kind of towards the very end, right? So do not become a slut. And even before, there's another time where it appears. So here, so this is the first one, right? The slut you are so bent on becoming. Then prevent yourself from looking like the slut I know you are so bent on becoming. So bent on becoming, so bent on becoming. And then the slut I have warned you against becoming, right? So it's always like insisting on like, you cannot become a slut. You have to be this decent woman, right? And so on that note, I want to go back to sweetness, and I think I'm going to try to find it again because I think it's in the New Yorker. So bear for a second while I find it here. Yeah, so here in this story in the New Yorker, there are some moments where you can see different words that are used to refer to the child. So I wrote them on my book, so I'm going to try to do Control F so we can find them here. Stranger here. Notice how, so we're going back to Sweetness, right, by Toni Morrison. Notice how the husband never touched her. So something interesting to think about in this story is the idea of intimacy, right? How they connect to the child. In this case, the father, but also the mother. Like, what is the relationship? How close are they? So one of the ways in which Lula Ann is, called or referred to is a stranger. Another one is, and it was, I don't know exactly where it was, but enemy. Oh, just before that, she was a stranger. More than that, an enemy, right? So you have these two, words to refer to. So it's not just someone you don't know, but it's someone that you antagonize, right? It's someone who is meant to make your life more difficult, and that wants to see the end of you, which is something very selfish, right? Like the father saw the child as an enemy because it was a traitor, like because the father thought that the mother had had an affair with someone else. But in time, the mother also sees the child like that. If you look at the very beginning of the story, you can see as well, it's not my fault, so you can't blame me. So here, it's a very interesting opening because you're already thinking, ooh, what could have happened? It didn't take more than an hour after they pulled her out from between my legs for me to realize something was wrong. So for me, when I read this, before reading the rest, I thought, well, maybe the child is dead. And the mom is trying not to blame herself because she couldn't have prevented it, right? But then the following sentence, I was like, what? She was so black, she scared me. midnight black, Sudanese black. And then I'm light skin. So here starts this play between being light skin and dark skin. And oftentimes very black people can sometimes be referred as black blue because there's a hint of blue in their skin, as in like the same way you would say you have cool skin or warm skin. So some black people have warm skin, and some black people have the bluer, like colder tone to their skin. Also notice how she says good hair, like the good kind of hair, not this like really kinky curly hair. My hair is the good kind because it's the one society respects, right? So that's something very interesting about the story. And then another word that was used to refer to her was, right, when she talks about her eyes, besides she has funny colored eyes, crow black with a blue tint, something witchy about them too. So far, the child has been described as a stranger, the enemy, a witch. And I don't know if this word was specifically mentioned. Yes. Lula Ann was a burden. Burden is something you have to carry, like something that weighs on you, that's like very difficult, that you can't let go of, right? So she doesn't see, at this point, stranger, enemy, witch, burden. There's this process of dehumanization where this girl is no longer a girl, but is an alien, a stranger. She even says so when she talks about, my husband is a porter, and when he got back off the rails, he looked at me like I really was crazy and looked at the baby like she was from the planet Jupiter. So in this one paragraph, she's referred to as an alien, as a stranger, as an enemy. And I don't think it's just the parent, the father's opinion. I think it's, I don't think it's just the father, it's the mother and the father. The mother comes to see her that way because from the very beginning, she doesn't want to breastfeed her child. She doesn't want that contact. She's like, no, stay away from me because you're too dark. Why do you think she's like scared of that blackness? Why do you think she's like repulsed from that, like by that like dark skin? And how does that dark skin inform and influence all the actions that the mother, takes later on throughout the story and in raising her child? Also, something that you mentioned, I think in the same way that in the story of Girl, the girl is defensive. In this story, Sweetness, I feel like it's the mother who is defensive, trying to explain why she did what she did. And that's why she insists, like, it's not my fault. You can't blame me. Like, I did the best that I could considering the situation. But again, you have to remember that this story is set in the 90s. She's talking about the 90s, and it's probably set in like 2015. So she's talking in retrospect about the upbringing of her child who was born in the 90s or 80s, 90s. So the society is so much more different than it was before. There's no segregation anymore. Of course, there's racism. Of course, life is super difficult for African American people, but it's not the same. And the idea is you shouldn't raise your child to be scared. You should raise your child to be strong and to try to make the world a better place, right? So she's doing the complete opposite, is trying to hide the child constantly so nobody sees this child and nobody is scared of this child that's so dark. It's like kind of like, actually in literature, oftentimes when you talk about the black man, it's referred to as like the idea of blackness is has been associated with the devil. So it's, for her, it's this idea when she talks about a witch and alien, it's kind of like hellish, almost like, stay away from me, you're too dark. And then I wanted you to also think about the relationship, like what the girl, we have some moments where we see how the girl has grown up. Has she become the woman that her mother wanted her to become, or has she become something else? That's something that I also want you to think about. And I also wanted you to think about the title, Sweetness. The same way that I wanted you to think about Girl, the title of Girl, like who is the girl? Is she, the antagonist? Is the protagonist? In the case of Sweetness, is she the protagonist? Is she the antagonist? Why is she called Sweetness? Okay, let me look at this question. It's like a curse. She talks about her ancestors, and it's like they have been whitening through the years. She refers to herself as high yellow, and then Lula Ann is born, reminding her of the black blood. Exactly. She's kind of, it seems like she's almost very proud of her ancestral skin color. Like, this child of mine is so black, probably because of something that the father, like from the father's side, like can't be mine, because we all have this good hair and we all have this light skin, and some of my family members have decided to pass, whereas others have accepted their darkness. And I think it's very important to understand as well. There's a moment where they say how an ancestor of them was married, like a white man married this black woman who passed as white, and they hid it from the children. Like nobody saw that the mother was black, which is fascinating, but also completely understandable considering the amount of racism that existed and exists in the US. Also very interesting that you would talk about it like a curse, especially when we have seen elements of like witchiness here and all of that. It's like I guess it could be seen as a blessing and a curse, because for the mother here, for Sweetness, it feels like it's a blessing. Like, I'm light-skinned, so I've been privileged during my life. Let me look at the next comment. I think the repulsion of the mother is a reaction to be stigmatized by having a black child when she had managed to, disguise herself so well for so long by not looking black. Yes, that's so interesting. It's that the mother is like, again, she's insisting on how good she is. Like, I'm the good kind of black person because I'm light skinned, because I have good hair, because it's not so easy for people to know that I'm black, so I'm acceptable. But this child cannot hide her blackness. It is so obvious. It is the only thing I can see about my child, to the point where the mother only sees her child as blackness. There's nothing more to the child, right? It's like, but who, is it a nice, like, it's a human, it's not just a thing, but it becomes a thing because it represents that blackness. It's like, oh, this is terrifying, because what is going to happen to this child that's so dark? And she's not prepared. She's not well prepared to raise that child because she's always lived a life of privilege within her, blackness, of course. So that's something that is also super interesting about this story, right? That Sweetness, the mother, can't conceive that things could get better for her as a light-skinned woman. So how can she think that her child is going to have a good life considering how dark she is? But she doesn't really give her daughter a chance. And that's what I find so sad about this story, that she doesn't let the child be who she is, or she doesn't even think that it might get better and then think, okay, well, I'm going to help you, live in this world as it gets better. And in that sense, I think it's survival. Like, I understand, I have some sort of sympathy for the mother, because I understand that, she's trying to do what she knows best, but it's very hurtful, right, at the same time. So I feel like it's a story of kind of like responsibility, like she feels responsible, but at the same time, this story has a hint of regret, that she's like, that's why she's insisting so much on blame and guilt. Like, it's not my fault. I'm telling you, it's not my fault. And on page 43, so you can go to the very end of the page. Can I? Yeah. So like here is like, I wasn't a bad mother. You have to know that, but I may have done some hurtful things to my only child because I had to protect her. I had to, all because of skin privileges. At first, I couldn't see past all that black to know who she was and just plain love her. But I do, I really do. I think she understands now. I think so. And I think if you think of for like the language she's using, it's very significant because she repeats the words often, and it doesn't happen that much in the story. So when it happens, it means something. And she's like, I do, I really do. I think she understands now. I think so. Like, she's insisting because she's trying to convince herself, like, I'm not sure that my daughter accepts me, but I need to convince myself that she does because I did my best within my circumstances. And she does accept and acknowledge that she couldn't see past all that black, right? Which is what I said before, like she could only see darkness. She can't see beyond. She's also very significant, the idea of darkness as like a screen where you can't see beyond that, like obscurity. So she doesn't give, as I said, the daughter a chance. So she's alienating the daughter. And it surprised you how the father's figure seems so involved in the whole thing. Can you tell me why you're surprised by that? Like, what do you mean in that sense? And why do you think he's so involved? So while you tell me about that, I wanted to say something about the father as well that I think is also very fascinating, which is that I think, and I don't exactly know where it happened, but I think the thing that I don't remember which page it was in, but the father was very angry at the mother because he thought that she had cheated on him, but he doesn't leave until she tells him that she's so dark because of him, not because of her. I think that's what angers him the most, the possibility that someone in his family might be that dark skin, or that blackness is his fault, since this is a story that has a lot to do with like blame and guilt and trying to say, this is your fault, it's your fault. I think the father gets really mad at that. It cannot accept that because, remember, this is a story about race and race privilege and skin privilege. And it's so interesting to see how it plays out. And the daughter is the complete opposite to them, where the daughter shows her blackness proudly. That's why they say that she was wearing a white dress. Yeah, on page 43 at the very end. The last 2 times I saw her, she was, well, striking, kind of bold and confident. Each time she came to see me, I forgot just how black she really was because she was using it to her advantage in beautiful white clothes. First of all, fascinating that the mother cannot forget about her daughter's blackness. When you would think, like, when I see my friends who are white, I don't think about them being white. And of course, I'm in Spain, I'm usually more with white people, but the times I've been with people who are racialized, who are from other ethnicities, I mean, it's like, okay, cool. Like, it's not to say I don't see color, because I think that's BS or bullshit, to say it more clearly, but it's to say that, especially within an African American community, you would think that color, like, it's just, you know, my skin, you get used to that different color. I mean, God, I can't say this properly. You have obviously the difference in color so that people have more privilege depending on whether they're light skin or dark skin. But I guess the fact that the mother would never forget about her child's blackness is very telling. It's very significant that she can't see past that, right? Let me look at the comments. In both stories, it's very much about the relationship between women where men don't have a big role. Yeah, totally. That's also something interesting that connects these two stories, because in Girl, we don't really know if the child has a father, right? But they do talk about, you know, men being bullied and falling in love and all that, which I think is a moment of sympathy that the mother has for the child at the very end. And in this story as well, it's like the father leaves. Then there's that moment of presence where he's trying, presence as in, I'm gonna give you some money so that you don't starve, essentially, but that's it. She's, I guess, a very contemporary way of helping, I guess, just giving money, but there's no real like conscious help, as in trying to humanize the child and trying to get to know the child better. And I feel like the child has become so bold and confident because either her personality or because of other people and other figures, like mentors in her life. And then what other comments? True, she says they argue until she tells him her blackness had to be from his own family. So we can see that pride and race step over the supposed infidelity. Yes, that's why I think it's so important to see this story as a commentary on race and privilege and skin color, because the whole story is about that blackness and how it's so weird that she's so dark, and it's always reminding us, like, you can't do this, you can't do that, because people are going to make fun of you, and I want to rent a new house, but I have to hide you from the landlord because they're not going to accept you. They can't accept me because I'm light skinned, but they won't accept you. And then you can see that the girl is growing up and thriving and having a good life, and she's getting married, and she's adopted a new name. She's calling herself Bride, which is like, I guess it could, I don't know what you think of the word bride, but you can see that as indicative as well as connection. Like, hey, I'm someone's bride. I have the capacity to be loved and to get married. And as well, interesting that she was using it to her advantage, the dress in beautiful, because she was dressed in white clothes, and a marriage, traditionally you get married in white. So again, it's also the idea of that contrast between black and white, and that you can connect those, let light and dark work together, right? And this, like, there's this beauty in this, and that, you know, boldness and confidence, and that she's striking, like, wow, she's become this woman that I was always making her not be, if that makes sense. Like, in the same way that in Girl, the mother is so bent, like, you can't become that slut, you know, that you're so bent on becoming. Here, it's like the mother is saying, you can't become that black woman that you're so bent on becoming. I have to prevent you from becoming a black woman. You have to hide your blackness. You have to, you know, I have to protect you from showing that blackness that you have. It's like, no, own it, right? I mean, I realize I'm a white woman talking about this, so what do I know? But that's the impression I get from this story, and this is why what Toni Morrison has often talked about, and she's got a lot of essays where she talks about blackness in America that I also encourage you to read about. I think she had one she published recently, I mean, last year or 2 years ago, called Source of Self-Regard, I think. The Source of Self-Regard. Yeah, which is a collection of essays and speeches, and it was published in 2019, and I really encourage you to have a look at it if you like it, because it's so interesting, and it has so many different topics. Talks about, you know, race and feminism, talks about blackness in literature. So if you're interested in which I think you should be, like, in learning about not just what's around you, like whiteness, but learning about others, because it allows us to have more empathy and to be more kind. So yeah, I don't know. I think we're reaching kind of the end. We have a few more minutes, so I don't know if you have any final comments about these two stories, that you find something that you thought was interesting, something that you want to add. I mean, hopefully we will be able to meet in April, but I don't know. I hope also you're staying safe and that your families are okay. And before I forget, the next story we'll read will be Sonny's Blues by James Baldwin. So I'll put it in the WhatsApp group. But yeah, I don't know if there was anything else that you wanted to say. And yeah, what I was gonna say is that if we meet in April through here or physically, we can. And you have any more comments, you can let me know. You can also tell me through the WhatsApp group. Because there's so much to say about these stories. I mean, we can go on for hours. I feel like even if they're short, they have so much to them that I find so interesting and so beautiful. And like, we didn't even talk about what's the word? We didn't even talk about in Sweetness, the mother trying to murder her child because she was so black. She held a blanket over her face, and then she was like, "What am I doing?" So it like shows that how powerful sexism and racism is in our society, right? But yeah, I don't know. I think that's it. Thank you very much for being here and for participating and for coming. And I hope, I mean, we didn't give you a lot of time to prepare. So if next month, we have one last question. Wait. But anyway, like for next month, you'll know if we do it online, you know how this works, and hopefully it goes well. I have a question regarding girl and what you asked about the girl being the main character or the antagonist. I'm not quite sure. Maybe more kind of a secondary character. Yeah, you can be a secondary character and an antagonist. I think here the girl is both the antagonist and the protagonist. What I mean by that is that if you take the point of view of the person who's speaking, the girl could be an antagonist because the person who's speaking, either mother or society, is talking to this girl about the things she cannot do or she must do, and is also insisting on the idea that she's trying to become a slut, which is something terrible in this society, right? You can't be a slut, whatever that means. So the girl is kind of the antagonist of the mother, right? You can also argue that she's the protagonist and that, well, the story is as much about the mother or that figure that's speaking as it is the story of the girl, because what the mother is telling the girl not to do reveals a lot about the mother, but also the girl responding and the hints we get about the girl also tell us a lot. So I don't know. I mean, I don't have a set answer. It's not like, oh, she's clearly this. I think I wanted to say that to show the idea that depending on how you look at it, she can be one or the other, right? Yeah, I don't know. I think that's it, right? Oh, you got the point. Very good. Thank you very much. And it is 7 p.m. So I didn't think I would say much, but apparently I love talking. So there's that. So thank you very much for joining. And I guess we'll see you next time, right? Is this how it works? Do I go?